Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 40th anniversary weekend. It's really wonderful to see all of you here, and it's a perfect afternoon for the Gardens of Harlexton. What could be a better spring topic? I'm Alexandra Like. I'm a member of the board of the Harlexton Society, and in the early 1970s, I was lucky enough to have been on the administration at Harlexton at the very, very first months of the program, before there were any coat hangers or mattresses even. And Peter O'Toole was roaming the gardens of Harlexton. But we welcome you, and part of the mission of the Harlexton Society is to keep the alumni in contact with one another, so we're really thrilled that you're here to join in the reunion festivities and to learn more about Harlexton. To that end, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Mark Valenzuela. Dr. Valenzuela is an associate professor of civil engineering at UE. He has taught at Harlexton on more than one occasion, and last summer he began a summer undergraduate program of research for civil engineering students to survey the terraces at Harlexton. They are with us today to share some of their findings. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Valenzuela.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's nice to have fans in the back, especially as they come all the way from the Atlantic. We always like to kid that we've got each other's backs. But I do want to thank Alexander for that introduction. And one of the nice things about being associated with Harlexton College, of course, is that you get to meet people that you would not otherwise meet. And so it's been my pleasure to be able to have conversations with Alexander about early years at Harlexton, and also about heraldry and genealogy and history and those sorts of things. So that's wonderful. And as an engineer, when I was doing graduate work up in upstate New York, I never thought that I would actually have this opportunity to do research in the gardens at Harlexton. A, I'd never heard of Harlexton, and B, well, I'll tell you a little bit more about my gardening experiences, okay? But it's my pleasure to give this talk about the gardens at Harlexton in conjunction with three of my wonderful students who are here with us today. And I do want to acknowledge the help of the Global Scholars Fund through the Institute for Global Enterprise here in Indiana for helping with some of the seed money to develop this idea about researching the gardens and grounds. And what we'll do is we'll kind of break it up. I'll talk for a little bit. I'm basically the warm-up act for these three young men. But what I want to mention, first of all, especially as we're celebrating the 40th anniversary, is that Harlexton presents a really unique opportunity, especially for engineering students. So as I was doing some research about the number of engineering students who get this opportunity to study abroad, in 2002 I did this little bit of research, and I found out that there were, nationally, 2% of all engineering students get to go study abroad. Okay? Do you know what the percentage is at UE? 25%, fully a quarter. Okay? So that's a wonderful opportunity, and it's not something that everybody is able to go. There are, of course, other reasons why people aren't able to go. Sometimes they're financial reasons. Sometimes there are student athletes who aren't able to go because of their commitments to athletics. And so we're very fortunate, of course, to be able to send this first group of civil engineering students to survey the gardens and grounds. I'm showing you a picture of a photo, actually from a postcard from the 1920s, an aerial view of Harlexton Manor. And I'm going to let you enjoy that for a little bit as I talk a little bit about the background for this research. Now, when you get to a talk by an engineer about Harlexton, a lot of people are going to think, hey, you're going to be talking about the architecture, and you're going to be talking about the structure and all of the technology. Well, really, in a lot of ways, I'm going to be talking about people. So here's a photo of some of my students from the fall of 2008. I've got a few students here right now. Brad's here, Jamin's here. And so we can talk about these people and the way that they meet these ideas, okay? And some of the ideas are pretty transformative, especially as we consider some of the structures. Right? And for me as an engineer, I get really excited about the structures and the technology, because what we'll find out is that there was a lot of interesting technological innovations, a lot of design innovations that were employed at Harlexton. Now, my good friend and learned colleague, Dr. Ed Bujac, will give you some more details about Harlexton, and he's here to regale you with stories, especially about some of the owners. But I'll give you a little bit of background as a way of talking about the survey work that we did. And one of the things that oftentimes is discussed is the way that Gregory borrowed, well, borrowed is a good word, maybe stole certain design features from other houses, especially as he was looking back towards this Tudor period or this Jacobean period. And so we'll notice that, well, this is Burley House in Stamford, okay, built somewhere between 1555 and 1587. And we can kind of see the massing of the structure here, especially this entrance, and kind of see some similarities and draw some parallels with the entrance that's fairly well known for Harlexton, especially for all of you who have been there. Now, we can also take a look at, for example, Montacute House. And on the left-hand side, we have Montacute, circa 1598. And we see this wonderful kind of summer house over here, and we see that kind of borrowed, again, maybe stolen, for Harlexton there in the Gardens and Grounds. And so we can definitely take a look at this ability for Gregory to employ lots of different architectural features and to borrow these architectural features. As a matter of fact, John Claudius Loudon recorded some of that history by visiting Harlexton Manor in 1840. And I'll tell you a little bit more about John Claudius, because he was actually one of the first theorists in landscape architecture. And so he wrote quite widely, published and edited a magazine called the Gardener's Magazine, and he had a chance to visit Harlexton and to talk to Gregory. And so this is what he says about Gregory. Well, Gregory examined personally most of the houses in Britain in the Jacobean style, or bearing a close analogy to it. Among those which he visited, it may be useful to others, such as ourselves now, to mention the following. And so you'll notice a long list of these manor houses from that time period. And I've noted 3 of them. We've already seen Burley House, Hardwick Hall, and also Temple Newsam. We'll take a look and see, well, what kinds of features are also borrowed from those historic manor houses from Britain. Now, as so often happens, when we're talking about Harlexton and the different experiences that we have, sometimes we go there with some set of expectations and it takes us in different directions, okay? And so here's the direction that I was taken by this gentleman, Dr. Ed Bujac, who's regaling people, students, at the Lincoln Cathedral field trip. And so, as so often happens, the US faculty get to hang out with the British faculty, at least the cool British faculty. And Ed and Joanne took us to Belton House. And it was a nice little field trip. And we had, some tea, and we wandered around the house, and we wandered around the grounds. And we were talking about Harlexton Manor with Dr. Michael Cullen. Many of you know Dr. Cullen. And it was a wonderful, lazy Sunday afternoon. And as so often happens, we start thinking, that Gregory, he started to borrow a lot of stuff from the architecture from other places, right? And so Ed said, you know what, he probably borrowed some stuff also from different gardens and grounds that he also visited. But it's hard to see, as opposed to seeing sort of these architectural features, because everything's kind of spread out. And so wouldn't it be nice, Mark, if you were to come back and actually do some survey work? So I think, hey, that's a wonderful idea, because then I get to hang out with you and Joanne again, okay? So there is the genesis, shall we say, of this project. All right. Now, that's our inspiration. And I think a lot of people here will say that, yes, Dr. Bujac, our esteemed colleague and good friend, is going to be an inspiration to a lot of our students today. Now, just a little plug for Dr. Bujac, just in case you didn't know he was on the radio. Okay, this morning at 11. Okay, so now here's the deal. People who know me kind of laugh when they find out that I'm talking about gardens. I don't know why well, I do know why they laugh. I've been known to kill plants, cacti included. Okay, and if they look at my backyard, there's not a whole lot of landscaping out there. Well, there are bunny rabbits out there, and they help take care of the gardens. But that's very similar to what's going on at Harlexton. Now, what's going to happen though is that we're going to take a look at the vegetation and the plant life that's planted there. And this is all well and good, but we can kind of think of that sort of like the furniture, or the tapestries, or the vases, or the statues that are at Harlexton and that kind of moved around and changed hands. We were just talking about two folks who dressed up as priests and stole some paintings at Harlexton. So things get moved. But what you'll notice is that over here, in this little terrace area, we'll notice this parterre kind of feature. So the intricate design of shrubbery, okay? But we'll notice that that's not there anymore. So things do change. You can take other views. Again, sort of this conservatory area, and also this parterre feature, no longer there if we take a look at modern photos of Harlexton. And you'll also notice that if we take a look at this little wall, this is the stereopticon of the Harlexton. This is the long gallery entrance on the side over here, and these are the steps leading up to the Dutch Canal. Well, notice that things change, right? But as a structural engineer, I'm actually interested more in the structure of the place, the thing that's kind of permanent. So what I'm taking a look at is, I'm taking a look at the major features of Harlexton. And so I'm going to just set things up and talk about some of these major features. Now, it was actually through Alexander that I heard about this scroll, this illuminated scroll that used to be found at the entrance of Harlexton Manor. And it's called Rejoicings at Harlexton. And so it goes something like this. On Friday, 26 February, the beautiful village of Harlexton near Grantham exhibited a scene of festivity and rejoicing such as the oldest inhabitants scarcely ever remember. And there are a lot of old inhabitants at Harlexton Village. Midway on the amphitheatric hill, in its immediate vicinity, a magnificent mansion from the designs of that talented restorer of the Tudor style of architecture, Anthony Salvin, Esquire, has been in a course of progression for the last 4 years. And although no more than 2/3 of the structure is raised, enough has been done to show that, when perfected, it will reflect honor on the arts of the country and hand down the name of its founder with distinguished éclat to a remote posterity. That's us. On the completion of the great central or clock tower, which rises to an elevation of 120 feet, the munificent proprietor, Gregory Esquire, has announced his intention of giving a dinner to the numerous artisans employed thereon in order to celebrate the interesting event. And if nothing else, Harlexton knows how to throw a good party. And some of you might know how to throw a good party after going to Harlexton. But the thing that I'm taking a look at is this amphitheatric hill. So that's going to be a landscaping feature that is going to be exploited by Gregory and also Anthony Salvin. So let's take a look and see what's going on. So we can take a look at different maps. We'll see lots of maps. These guys will show you better maps, okay? But this is from 1779, and we'll notice here's Harlexton. Here's the village church. It's been around longer than 1779. And then some of the village cabins and houses over here. But of course, Harlexton hasn't been, the manor house hasn't been built yet. But we'll notice this hatching here kind of shows the hillside on which that beautiful manor will rise, okay? We can take a look at it a little bit more and say Harlexton 1806. Again, these are archival sorts of things that we found. My students helped me find them. So I'm just kind of exploiting them now for the effect over here. So here's Harlexton Village again. Again, we notice the hatchings. And so there's something going on, but not very clear in terms of the steepness, in terms of the dramatic effect of the hillside. Okay. 1840s. At this point, Harlexton Manor is actually being built by Gregory. But again, not a whole lot of detail in terms of where that's actually happening and where that's going on over here. Still not making it to the maps yet. Okay. And that's where, of course, our students will be coming in. Now, in terms of this amphitheatric hill, this is really visible from several different locations, and some locations not very. But one location that we found that was very visible is from this view, which is a lovely view. And the students will remember this view because Ziggy, the minibus driver, actually took us around here, even though we shouldn't have gone around here. This is Beaver Castle. We got into the private parking lot here of Beaver Castle, and there is Harlexton Manor, set on this amphitheater, okay? And what a lovely view to be able to get, and to show the folks at Beaver Castle, okay, who are titled, here we are, we're the biggest house in England, okay? So, there's that amphitheatric hill. Again, a landscaping feature that was exploited. And in fact, J.C. Loudon goes on to say, it is clear from the example of Harlexton that to carry out the ancient style of gardening to its fullest extent, the side or sides of a hill are essential as groundwork, and that part of the hill must be above the house and part of the hill must be below the house to create this amphitheater. Now, it's an illusion, just like so many things about Harlechston, because as the students will kind of point out, well, is this true or not? Ask them that question. Is the hill above the house or not? Now, did the architect employ this in other places? And did he find inspiration in other manor houses? Well, the architect we said was Anthony Southam. He created this house after Harlechston called Thoresby Hall. It's now a spa, so you can go there if you like. And apparently from the writings of Country Life, they said that this is actually much steeper in terms of the ground than at Harlechston. So Anthony Southam seems to have been also using that effect of this amphitheatric hill to highlight the manor. And so we're starting to see this interaction between the grounds and the manor that's being raised from the ground. In fact, we can kind of see the same sort of idea in Hardwick Hall from that time period of 1597. This is kind of a deceptive point of view because you're not actually seeing that amphitheatric hill because the photographer is on that hill. Okay. Now, here's where things get a little more of an engineering feel. I've got some engineers in the audience, so what we're going to say is that here's Hardwick Hall, but we'll notice that here's some contour lines. These contour lines, this is from an ordnance survey map. We'll talk more about these ordnance survey maps, but see how close together these lines are? That tells you how steep things are. So it presents this background, this kind of backdrop, okay? But it plays an important part. It's not just any sort of background. Okay. Now, the other feature, which many of you will know about, was also commented upon by John Claudius Loudon, okay? And he writes about it like this. The main approach will be straight and very nearly a mile in length, very nearly. From the public road, it first gradually descends more than half its length to the bottom of a valley in which a lake of great extent might readily be formed, and then it gradually ascends to the court of honor in front of the mansion. This is back in 1840. Okay. I'll make a few comments about this, because notice that when John Claudius Loudon is talking about this, everything's in the future tense. It might be, it will. It hasn't happened yet in 1840. In fact, you'll notice that he doesn't mention anything about the kitchen gardens, doesn't mention anything about the gatehouse, because they might not be there yet. And as a matter of fact, if we think about the location of the lake, place yourself in this position. Here's the kitchen wall in gardens over here. So you're thinking that lake with all the swans and the ducks that we're not supposed to feed, they're back behind you, okay? So that's where the lake is, but in earlier watercolors, and Dr. Bujak will show you this and maybe talk about this a little bit more, it's actually a little bit closer to the location of the main entrance to Harlechston. Okay. The other thing that I'll point out in terms of his description of that nearly mile-long drive, it has no mention of naked college students running up and down. I don't think he envisioned that as part of the architectural features. Okay? So, and that's probably a good thing. Oh, sorry. Now, did he have inspiration? Well, perhaps he did. He did visit Temple Newsome, and then what we'll notice is, again, Temple Newsome is over here, and kind of flat in terms of the location where Temple Newsome is, but we'll notice, oh, here's a little drive over here. Let's see what the effect is of this drive. Well, heck, kind of looks like it. Whether it was the inspiration or not quite sure yet. But again, that's part of the research that we're trying to do, trying to see what these analogies are. But the big sort of architectural structural feature that's being designed, that we think is designed, is actually these terraces. And John Claudius Loudon is, again, talking about this in terms of a geometric style. All right? So he writes this, the geometric style, and he's talking about in different countries, Italy, France, and Holland. The geometric style in Italy, owing to the hilliness of the country and the national taste of the inhabitants for architecture, is characterized by flights of steps in the open air, terrace walls, vases, and statues. The same style in France, where estates are much more extensive, the surface of the country more even, and the inhabitants, and this is interesting, and the inhabitants less fond of architecture, tell that to a Frenchman, is characterized by long avenues. While in Holland, a perfectly flat country, it is distinguished by long, straight canals and grassy terraces. Thus, we have the Italian, the French, and the Dutch schools of the geometric style. Mr. Gregory will create what may be called an atmosphere of high artificial garden scenery in the geometric style round and overhanging the mansion. And what we'll notice is that oftentimes these are known as the French terraces, flat and open like this. Over here, we'll see a better view of this later on, but this is the Italian gardens. And then, of course, you know that there's the Dutch canal and also Bob of blessed memory, our friend the Swan. Okay. Now, as we're thinking about this, we can take a look at other views of the gardens and the terraces especially. These are photos from 1906 in Country Life magazine. The terraced gardens will be on 7 different levels, communicating by flights of steps ornamented with vases, figures, and numerous other suitable objects. This is what John Carly's Walden is talking about. But he also talks about this. The terraced gardens at Harlexton, though only commenced, already afford some valuable hints to the landscape gardener. Among these is the good effect of having terraced platforms above the eye as well as under it. The flight of steps which lead to those above the eye form an invitation to ascend, which the visitor is most anxious to accept, since he cannot be aware of what he is to see. In this respect, the geometric style equally as well as the natural style. The artist surprises, varies, and conceals the bound. And so we see these, if you're standing right here, right next to the long gallery, there's a terrace here that we can kind of see. Then if we turn around, we'll notice, oh, there's a flight of steps that's inviting us to see what's beyond our field of vision up in this location, where we know that Bob used to live. Of course, this becomes a little bit more easy for us if we're actually in one of the beautiful rooms of Harlexton Manor, and so we're going to start to see this interaction between these different terraces. And here the surprise is a little bit broken, but we do get a view of our friend Bob, if nothing else. And then we also get a view of the Italian gardens, and here we see these terraces and flights of steps, and also these walls that create these terraces. So at this point, we get a feel for like the background, like the structural basis for our survey work, and I'm going to leave it actually to the folks who did the work. I'm not going to take credit for their work, and they get to talk about their work on the gardens and grounds. And I will say that it's great for these students to be able to go during the summer, because otherwise they would not have had the opportunity to be able to go. And it's a different kind of experience, and an experience that I hope will continue, because these students are able to not take from Harlexton, but actually hopefully give back to Harlexton, which is part of that research experience, and also partly that experience of exploring beyond what we can do necessarily in the classroom. So I'm going to turn it over to these folks, and they'll introduce themselves.
All right, thank you, Dr. Mark. We'll get set up here. Pretty good. Well, thank you all for coming. We're happy to share our experience with you and our research findings as well. Today, David Wichman, Richie Paredes, and myself, Ryan Jers, will be taking you on our adventure through Harlexton Manor. And we should start out just the same way that we started out, as by heading up through the gates and walking into Harlexton Manor ourselves. So, like I said, we will be presenting to you our Harlexton surveying research from the summer 2010. We started out with 2 main goals, and that was to create kind of a state-of-the-art, first-time 3D topographical map of Harlexton Manor and the surrounding gardens. Another goal was to kind of create a better understanding for ourselves and for future students as well as faculty, a better understanding of Gregory Gregory, the man behind the manor. Now this broke down into 2 basic sectors, the first one being surveying, which is where a lot of our engineering experience came into hand. And we're going to talk more about the area that we've covered in our final project a little bit later in the presentation. The second sector came to the archives of Harlexton Manor. We're going to tell you a little bit more about the gardens and the surrounding grounds at Harlexton, and we're also going to tell you a little bit more what we found out about Gregory Gregory and his life as well. So next, Richie's going to tell you a little bit more about our goals.
Thank you, Ryan. As Ryan was saying, we set out to have 2 main goals for this project in the trial completion. When Dr. Mark and Tyler, all 3 of us, we're really excited for the opportunity to travel abroad and be able to not only experience that British culture, but also being able to immerse ourselves in this new project of surveying the manor, understanding more of the history of Harleston itself. Our main goal, as Ryan said, it was to create a 3D topographical map of the manor itself. The question comes to rise is, well, why are we doing this? Why are we wanting to do a 3D topographical map of the garden itself? Well, actually, the reason is there's no official record of the layout, design of manors. The only one, and up to date before us, was an 1887 ordnance map, which actually doesn't show up the clear distances and the clear terraces as Dr. Valenzuela presented. So we wanted to exploit that idea and be able to see if we could actually design and put into an AutoCAD drawing the terraces and the spacings itself. The red area shows the areas that Dr. Valenzuela started working with his nephew the summer before we went, and he covered about 3,000 points. The area in blue is the area that we were expecting to cover the summer that we went from last year, which included the Dutch Canal, Telon Gardens, as well as Lion Terrace right here. As a baseline, we're aiming for 3,000 points as well. Now going to the second part of the story was the secondary goals for us, which as engineers we try to understand the processes and try to understand the mechanisms of the landscaping and the structures itself. But in this case, we want to know what was the reason behind the terraces, if there was actually a hide in the manor itself. So, as we went through the research archives, and as well as Dr. Valenzuela mentioned, we found a lot of interesting images and information and photos, and we can see that there's through our research, we found a picture that shows two hills in the entrance of the manor itself, which clearly nowadays there's no two hills. There's the parking lot and the pathway that takes you to the carriage house itself. So this clearly shows the point that changes have occurred through the years in Harleston Manor through different owners that went through that wanted to change the architectural view of the manor and the gardens itself. Going also into the most juicy topic I can find out way was Gregory. We don't know. Before we went there, I could say Gregory was a topic that really none of people touched, and we weren't too sure about it. We weren't sure where his location of death was, his cause of death, the year. We just knew that he was the owner, and he was a creative Harleston pretty much. So that's about it. So we wanted to jump into more of the information, try to figure out more about him and the history. Through the research, through the current research as well, we find the Gregory's will, which helped us find out the location as well as the date that he passed away and the cause of death, as well as sensor records from Harleston Village that provide us a lot of information from the people that lived in the manor as well as Gregory. I'm going to give it to David so he can keep on going for the survey.
Thank you. Now we're going to discuss a little bit about the surveying that we did while we were there. We're going to cover a little bit about the gardens that we found there. So what we surveyed, we approximately covered 11 acres while we were there, which included the Dutch Canal, the Italian Gardens, the Lion Terrace, the Upper Terrace, and the East Terrace. To get such a big area, we had to work approximately 8 to 9 hours a day, 5 days a week. That left the weekends open for us to travel, so we could travel or do various things that we want to do while we were in England. But with the heavy work schedule that we did have, we completed 90% of our field work in just 2 weeks, and 70% of the mapping was also completed in that 2 weeks. The equipment that we used was one manual total station and one robotic total station. This is something new to us. We didn't really have the chance while in class to use a robotic total station. So this was a good experience for us to get to use some advanced equipment. So compared to the 3,000 points that we thought we would get this summer, we actually got 9,500 points, total points that covered the entire ground, so that's a big improvement from what we expected. And here is the 2D topographical map that we obtained while we were there. To give you a little bit of bearing, up here is the Harleston Manor itself. Here's the Dutch Canal, the Italian Gardens right here, and the Lion Terrace is located up here. So what you're looking at is, as Dr. Mark covered earlier, is a map that has contour lines on it. What contour lines are lines that show elevation change in a 2D plane. So the thicker lines that you see show 10-foot intervals on the 2D plane, and As he said earlier, the closer the lines are together, the steeper they are. So you can see like right here, it's a really steep upgrade, but over here it's pretty shallow. So now for the 3D map. Here's the 3D map that we covered while we were there. As you can see, here is the time garden structure. Here's some stairs that lead up there. The void spaces that you see here and here are just like areas where there were trees or bushes that we could not get the total station to. So those were trees or bushes. Now back to Richard.
Thank you, David. So I mentioned earlier, the research, once we covered the surveying part, which we actually covered in a pretty quick time, in 2 weeks, we had so much spare time. It's like, okay, well, let's find research. We want to find more about the Hodgson Manor and its prior owners. The 1887 ordinance map that I mentioned earlier, it was a good baseline for us. It gave us a rough idea of what we're looking for in the aspect of the terraces. And as well as Dr. Valenzuela presented earlier, it was planned to have 7 terraces and be able to have a constant, even spacing between every terrace itself. As you can see in the orange map, you only see hash marks, which only represent the location of the hills itself. They don't show any type of slope, distance between the terraces. So even though it gives you a really rough idea, there's no accurate, you cannot find accurate dimensions between the layering of the gardens as well for the Hodgson Manor as well. As David presented earlier, it is a final product that we have so far. We're going to keep on working on this. And an interesting feature about this is, like Dr. Mark said, they designed for 7 terraces. As you can see here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So actually, the 7 terraces were actually done, and all of them were even spacing. So whenever the design for the gardens was promoted, they actually did it, even though it doesn't look in the real life. Whenever we do it, we did a study. It shows that there's actually 7 terraces with 10 square animals in each part. I'll give it to Ryan to do the manual research.
All right, so moving on to our research. This is really where I got down and dirty. The 8 to 9 hours a day, don't take that at face value. After we got done surveying for the 8 or 9 hours a day, then we were in the archives another couple hours at night, have dinner, and then we'd be back there. So they were very long days, but they were all very enjoyable and very fun. But what we were looking for was to uncover more about Gregory himself. We were able to find on ancestry.co.uk a death index in the district of Grantham, where we can see Gregory's name is located here. Now, within his will, it is stated that he wished to be buried in the parish that he is present upon his death. So his parish that he died is somewhere in the district of Grantham, which we would suspect would be Harlexton. Now, what we know, as we went through the archival research, we actually found a burial index from St. Mary St. Peter's Church in the village of Harlexton, saying that he was buried there on June 30th, 1854. He was approximately 68 years old. Now, we did take a little field trip to the church, and we spoke with the board to see if we could go find his grave. And while we were not able to find his grave, we did find 2 of his relatives, and then a blank grave sitting right next to it. So it got a little thick and a little intense, and the board didn't cooperate with us the way we wanted to. So that's for future students to go check out. As soon as they get over there, they'll take care of that. But anyways, we have some assumptions, and we were wondering what that's going to come in the future. So Dr. Allen needs more money, or Dr. Mark needs more money to take more students out there. Anyways, if you couldn't see that as well, I know it's a small picture. This is his name. It definitely is Gregory. It's not very hard to miss. He's got the same first name as his last name. So right there. Now, in his will, we didn't run through that. There is mentioned in the first few paragraphs, before anybody else is mentioned in the estate and is given any money or any estate divvied up, the confidential servant. What's the confidential servant? What does that mean? So we actually went through books and through the time, the Victorian era, to see what a confidential servant means. We even looked up the definition for the time. And really, basically, this is a close friend. Somebody that Gregory entrusted with his secrets to do his duties out of town whenever they needed to be done. And the name in there was actually kind of fuzzy and kind of hard to see as a very scripted typing. So we went to the census records of 1841, where Gregory is located at Huntington Hall as Hardison Manor is being built. We see a name right underneath his name, along with the list of the rest of the servants, as Samuel Bagley. When we come to the 1851 census record in Harlexton, for Harlexton Manor, you see one name that's repeated from Huntington Hall. The rest of the servants were not brought, but one person was, and that was Samuel Bagley, and he's listed as the head butler for Gregory. So we know that Gregory was a bit of a recluse, did not like to keep a bunch of information on himself, and we don't know what happened to all that, but he did have one close, trusted friend, and that was his servant, Samuel Bagley, who hails from his home county of Nottinghamshire, and he came from a town just down the road from where Gregory was from, in Bingham. Now, we talked a lot about the gardens, and we discussed that a whole lot, but what does that mean unless you have a first gardener to attend to them? We know that Gregory was a man who was well-traveled. He had plenty of money, as you can see from the manor that he built. And we have located it as far as the Crimea and Constantinople along his travels. So what we assume is that he had gone on his travels to go diversify the manor in his gardens, the plants, the trees, which we know have been ripped up and new trees and plants have been replaced. However, who was to attend to those plants from all over Europe and the Middle East that he was traveling? So we went back to the census of 1841 and 1851. They tell us so much. Again, at Huntington Hall, we do find a gardener, and that is a Richard Wade with his wife Hannah and his son Henry Wade. You come 10 years later to Harlexton Manor in the village of Harlexton, and you don't see any names like that anymore. However, as you flip through the tedious pages, and on page 17, at house number 70, there is a Richard Wade, a Hannah Wade, and a William Wade. Now, we don't know why Henry might have changed the name or how that might have happened, but they were all exactly 10 years older than they were the previous census, and they're located in the village of Harlexton. And he is the only gardener listed in the village of Harlexton. So what this tells us is that the kitchen garden that is there now was not constructed and was not livable as it is known today and is known in the past 30 years or so to have gardeners live there. However, Richard Wade did live in the village and probably more than likely attended to the gardens at Harlexton Manor. So, in conclusion, we'd like to tell you a little bit more, and David's going to discuss that a little bit more for you.
Well, we wanted to sum up exactly what we did while we were over there and what we learned. First off, we started to make a 3D topographical map of Harlexton Manor, so we hope that it can be used in the future for future projects, maybe at Harlexton, or even for further research. We also, as civil engineers, we gained knowledge for us using new and innovative equipment such as robotic total stations that will hopefully further our information about those.
We're also to uncover a whole bunch about Gregory's past that was previously unknown. It was fun for us to do. It was very interesting. If you're a history buff, it was great. So we learned more about himself, who he kept close to himself, all those important details, which is not a technical engineering aspect of it. So it gave us a nice breadth across the research that we did.
And for the last point as well, we gained a lot of cultural appreciation to not only for the English lifestyle and the European lifestyle, but as well as the lifestyle in the past from Gregory, on how people live and how they deal with problems in those times. So that human aspect of the project was really valuable for the three of us, as well as the engineering aspect for that project. And we promised that Dr. Mark was never harmed in the process, even though we pushed it around, but it's fine.
And so I know we're coming to a conclusion, but hold on to your seats, because like I said, we had a lot of fun here. There is more. One night while we were having supper with Dr. Bujak, Dr. Mark, and some of the other faculty at Harlexton in the Vander Elst room, we noticed a picture hanging on, a portrait hanging on the wall, rather. And to give you a little background about the Vander Elst room, Violet Vander Elst was the owner of the manor before the Jesuits, and she actually performed seances and other spooky type of deals in this room. So we thought we'd spend a couple of nights there and have some dinner and some supper time. It's actually the faculty room now at Harlexton Manor. Anyways, we know the three of us noticed this portrait hanging there, and well, we're curious, young, aspiring academics, and we asked Dr. Mark, who knows so much history about Harleston Manor, who is it? Well, he said, I don't know. And generally, the consensus is, since it's in the Vander Els room, it just must be Miss Vander Els herself. So we just kind of took that for face value and kept going. He knows his stuff. While we were researching the archives a couple days later, we came across this photo from Tim Knox, a historian who did a study on Harleston in 1997, an engagement photo of Catherine Sherwin Gregory. She is a blood relative of Gregory Gregory, and she inherited Harleston Manor after John Sherwin Gregory passed away, her husband. This is an engagement photo when she was young, just getting married. This is the portrait of a woman who strikes very similar to that of Catherine Sherwin Gregory. You can notice the eyes, the nose, and a lot of the soft features of the face. What really sticks out is the strong chin she has, both young and old. Now this is a lot later, and it is a little bit up to debate, it's more for your opinion, but we all thought that she looked very similar. So Dr. Mark mentioned that the manor has been passed from hand to hand over the years, and that even two priests snuck in and they stole portraits. So we thought it was awesome and it was great that a portrait that could possibly be Catherine Sherwin Gregory has withstood years and was able to get through the hands and pass down. And while nobody knows who it is now, we think we might be onto something. We think Dr. Bujak might think we're onto something. So that makes us feel a little bit better.
Again, we'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to give you this presentation. We'd like to thank Harleston for giving us the opportunity to go over there and do the research, for letting us stay over there and conduct these sorts of things. And especially we'd like to thank Dr. Mark for being there for us. I mean, he's the one that really got this thing together for us. And we had a great time over there, so we'd just like to thank him. But now I think we'll open the floor to any questions. If you guys have anything you guys want to say.
I have lots of questions, but I'll wait till
We do
later.
too.
But, just a couple. The walled gardens on the other side of the gatehouse,
Yes.
was that built much more recently than the manor, you know, when that was built?
Just, well, like what I said earlier, with Richard Wade, the first gardener, living in the village and not at the manor house, we do know at the time the manor was built, and when he was as the first head gardener, that they probably were not there. And we do have record that they weren't built yet. So those did come after the manor was built. And it's been a while since the summer, so all that research that we dug up, it's a little fuzzy here. We think we might have found kind of the time when they were built. I can't give you that off the top of my head, but
That's for next semester.
that's for next semester, and I'll be graduated. That's for these guys. Let them go. So those were implemented and built at a later date.
Was the lake man-made, or was it a natural lake?
The Dutch Canal?
No, past, yeah, almost up to the gate.
Oh, where the bridge crosses.
Yes.
Yes. We didn't actually take our surveying out that far, but it is a man-made lake. It's not naturally there. That was part of the landscape architecture.
Is it true that Harleston's highest point is, I don't know how much higher than Beaver Castle?
3 feet taller?
Maybe? Is it?
Could be.
I guess you're gonna wait till our 50th anniversary.
Do you guys have any insight into that? We discussed it the other night. We came across something. Again, this was a summer ago. We've all had design projects and classes since then. But we did, yeah, Dr. Mark is nodding his head. It is actually taller than Beaver Castle. 3 feet is what we think is by our calculations. Just enough to say, hey, one more room, just a little bit higher, we're better than you. So,
And that was another question. Exactly how many rooms are there?
we did not count. We stayed outside.
And my final question, I think I heard this on the radio this week, that the direction of the way the manor is structured and the drive, there's something about at a certain time of the year, summer solstice or something, that it's supposed to, is there any merit to that, you know? You know what
I
I'm
mean,
talking
it's-
about?
There it is.
Yeah,
the summer
Uh, We can actually, that's phase 3 of our project. So we do astronomical observations, but maybe in the 45th year anniversary.
I'm just giving you some,
Okay, good.
And we did, I hate to, anybody that ever tried to run that he mentioned or alluded to the fact of an 8 mile or a mile, the driveway's not actually a mile. It's about 8/10 of a mile. I'm sorry to break your hearts about that, if any of you were thinking that we did run a mile. It's close, it's not quite there yet. Any other questions though?
Do you want to go back to the going on from 3 miles ago?
I can do that. Do you like that?
Yeah, and I have a question.
Oh, there we go. Okay. That bump, is that the normal structure?
That bump?
Yeah.
That's the
And where's the location of the castle itself?
If you,
Let me go back. And now we'll go ahead.
if you watch the video as you rotate around,
You might need to do that.
Just point to it, I don't need to see what they.
You can't see it from
can't
that
see it
view.
from here.
Oh, I see.
Look out real quick.
Let's get it up.
The castle's right over here at this corner. Manor, over there. When it turns,
Right there.
There it is.
See where those 3 points are right there? Those are actually shots that we took on the manor house itself using the robotic station. The way AutoCAD does it's kind of funny. It assumes that's part of the land, so that's why it kind of builds up to that. But those are the points that.
So do you observe the drive like, that's where I don't see that the design, but the architecture, was it broke down and up like you want to be?
Yeah. The drive.
we didn't survey the drive. We didn't go that way.
Because he was talking about something about the architectural.
About how it
feature
is
that
down halfway.
How high up, and then you look down and you go up there, and then you was that true?
It does do that.
It
Is that
doesn't.
what you're asking?
It doesn't.
No, it does.
Oh, it does?
It does
Okay.
come down and it goes
Okay,
back
it
up.
worked out.
Yeah.
Do that to the club, right?
Yeah, right up in the front.
Do that to the club.
Yeah.
How long was your summer program?
5 weeks. 5 weeks. We left on June 22nd, 23rd, and we got back. And Dr. Mark stayed over there a little bit longer, but the 3 of us had an interesting trip on the way back. But we left on July 23rd. So it was about right at 5 weeks. So enough time to kind of go to some other place. We went to Ireland. They went to Italy at one point. I was in Spain at some time. So yeah, 5 weeks long. It wasn't long enough. It wasn't long enough. Yeah.
The contour lines on the map of the terracing, is that all man-made terracing or is it the natural terracing of the landscape?
We believe that it is man-made because it's such at even intervals, and you can kind of see how some of the terraces and the bigger they kind of dip in at specific points. It looks like it's very symmetric, so we do believe that they're man-made. Right here, you can kind of see how they're symmetric along the Dutch Canal here. They kind of build up in direct intervals, so they are man-made.
And another thing that we kind of touched on when we got back home and through last semester, basically he cut this amphitheater out of a hill, and this hill is much of it is a very clayey soil. So we have kind of set it up for maybe the next year or for future students to do a test on a clay sample, a brick clay sample from the manor, and then a soil sample from the terraces back here. We're going to see, and we can do the cut and fill calculations, if the manor was actually made out of the soil they cut it out of. If they fired the clay and the brick right there on the side. So that's for the future. Keep that in mind. It could be true. Anything else? Gilly?
As far as like the research on Gregory, did you find out what he did for a living to make the mass amounts of money he had?
He inherited the
Really?
mass amount of money. Yeah, he inherited the manor itself, and Carlton Manor was actually There's a manor house in the village, which he actually demolished and then built his manor to rival that of the Duke of Rutland. The Duke.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So he actually designed the manor himself, or no?
He did. He had his architects and engineers do that. But I mean, he said, hey, I want it to be a little bit bigger, and a little bit 3 feet taller, and a little more room. So, he did have that going for him. Well, we appreciate your guys' questions. And if you have anything else, we'll be sitting around afterwards and talk to us. And Dr. Bujak will come and actually make us look even worse.